how did you get into the solar industry, right? Because it wasn't really a solar industry. And he said, well, President Nixon asked, is solar like a viable option for this country? And Fred was a professor at the University of Maryland at the time and got a couple of his colleagues together and wrote a paper. Almost no one tells me they're anti-solar, right? But sometimes they'll say, well, I really do believe in all of the above. Solar is an important part of that all of the above strategy. And here are the ways in which we can work together to make that so.
Hey, welcome back, Solar Warriors. Thank you for giving us the only non-renewable resource you've got. That, of course, is your time. Today, we're going to talk a lot about time. You see, the solar industry is relatively new, and we have covered so much ground in the last 50 years. If you've been paying attention, we've been celebrating a few milestones like 5 million solar rooftops and 50 years of the solar energy industry and the Solar Energy Industry Association. I have the privilege today to be in the SEIA headquarters here in Washington, D.C. to chat with SEIA's president and CEO, Abby Hopper. Thank you for tuning in, and please subscribe because we have interviews just like this with leaders on the front lines of the clean energy transition. I hope that you will be back again soon. For now, let's get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior, as we tune into another powerful conversation here on SunCast. Abby, it is so fun to be here in your offices.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. This is my home away from home.
Yeah, I imagine you spend quite a bit of time here. We were talking about how sunny it is. You've got quite an ally just outside the window here.
Absolutely. I can give a real-time update on the sun at any time, any point.
Indeed. The environment last night was, in a word, electric.
Yes.
I think that you guys pulled off an absolutely stunning gala. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I had personally never been to the National Portrait Gallery, but I heard not only Steph Bosch, but more than a dozen people say that it was their secret respite for lunch.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Hat tip, when you're in DC, check out the National Portrait Gallery.
Absolutely. And like all Smithsonian's, it's free.
Yes, it is. And it is an absolute... Did you see the portrait of Oprah?
I did not see the portrait of Oprah. I have seen... One of my favorite places to go is the portrait gallery of all the presidents.
Yes.
And so there are the portraits, but also there's the history. And so you can kind of walk through our nation's history via a look at the presidents.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I'm going to have to go back. I'm going to take the kids when we're back in town in August.
They would love it.
It's been quite a moment for SEIA. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting us to Washington, but also thank you for the incredible advocacy that you personally are taking on. I have rarely seen any executive in our industry get as much television time as you got for the 5 million roofs. You have an incredible team that is really rowing very hard in the right direction. I've said a lot that if there's one thing we got to get right in the next 50 years, it's the messaging. I think that you guys are doing a great job of that.
Thank you.
With that in mind, you've been at the helm of SEIA now for a few years, and we're going to talk about sort of a little bit of the history. But what does SEIA stand for these days?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sort of noticing the storytelling. The team that we have here gets it, right?
Yeah.
I am a huge believer that most of life is storytelling, right? Whether it is in a personal relationship or an advocacy position or the news, right? It's all about storytelling. And so to have a team of incredibly skilled communicators that help me tell the story has, I think, transformed the way that people experience and think about solar and storage. So that's been really an exciting area of growth for us. What does SEIA stand for today? Oh my goodness. I talked a little bit yesterday about, where we came from, where we are now, and where we're headed. And, where we are now, what does it stand for today is, it is the organization is a group of intensely committed people. We do actually, and I have data to back that up. We do surveying of our employees, and most of us are here because we believe in the mission, right? And so that mission-driven focus comes through in the work. Most of us are here because we believe in a just transition, and so equity as a foundational value of the organization matters both for, if you are an employee of SEIA, but it matters for our advocacy, for our storytelling, for how we show up for the industry, how we conduct events. But also the thing I really love about SEIA is I think it mirrors the industry in that we at least think we're incredibly entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah.
We are constantly evolving, constantly sort of both tracking industry and following it and anticipating industry and leading it, right? And so people come here and they have great ideas and then we go do them. And so it's a great time to be both in the industry, but we're talking about SEIA. It's a great time to be at SEIA.
I think so. It's also, for me, emblematic of a lot of what we've seen in the last 4 years here in the DOE, for example. I think that SEIA, in my 18 years, has never been more dynamic than it is now. You use the word entrepreneurial. I think that's accurate. If you look at how Secretary Granholm has set up the DOE, it's, from Jigger across the board, David Crane, like a lot of folks who have taken risks.
Yeah.
Right? David Crane, like very famously took a lot of risks.
Totally.
And he stood by them.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
And to our credit. So it's been wonderful to see how SEIA has received feedback, has diversified the board, has diversified the initiatives that you're focused on. And I'll note, I was chatting with Justin Baca before we began, that I think that the industry underestimates the amount of not just entrepreneurism, but intelligence in these walls. And I'll use Joan. I love to use Joan as an example. Joan White, just like every time I talk with her, she tells me something I didn't know about storage that just blows my mind, right? And she's one of numerous experts who choose to be here rather than embedded in corporate. Yeah. So you mentioned, we talked a little bit about sort of where SEIA is now and what it stands for. Yesterday we had quite a privilege. And for those who are watching and haven't yet seen it, we will also, thank you, gave us the opportunity to record. We will be publishing a panel that included, and I'll let you introduce kind of who they are, but included 3 kind of iconic past SEIA members or executives. And you very astutely moderated a discussion. And I said to Jen that it was kind of it was like watching a look back at the baton being passed to you in that conversation.
That's exactly right. So it's funny, speaking of entrepreneurship, right? That whole day yesterday, which I found so magical, started because we were standing around the office one day talking about this big party and there's so much more than just the party. Like we want to spend some time focusing on where we've been and giving voice to some of those voices. And so we just said like, hey, we should do something that afternoon before. And what was an idea born in these walls became this incredibly well-attended and impactful conversation. And so I had the privilege yesterday of, and I use the word moderating very loosely with those gentlemen.
Yes.
Fred Morse, who was one of the founders of SEIA. So he was here in 1974 and was on the board actually when I joined in 2017. And then Scott Sklar, who was the executive director from 1985 to 2000.
Yeah, wow.
And then Roan Resch, who was my predecessor, and he was here from 2004 to 2016.
Two people who both carried for more than a decade. Carried the leadership of the organization.
Yeah. And I sat there on that stage and, Fred talked about building and sort of visioning this organization, right, from nothing. I asked him last night at the gala, I said, Fred, how did you get into the solar industry, right? Because it wasn't really a solar industry. And he said, well, President Nixon asked.
President Carter.
No, Nixon. President Nixon asked, is solar like a viable option for this country? And Fred was a professor at the University of Maryland at the time and got a couple of his colleagues together and wrote a paper. And that was his personal journey into the industry. Yes, then he went on and did work for President Carter and things, but it was Nixon, which is wild.
Fred's stories are hilarious.
Fred's stories are hilarious.
Yeah.
And then Sklar talked about, two things. One, really professionalized the organization from kind of an entity that was managed by a consulting company that had a whole bunch of clients, right? To a full-time executive director, staff, an office, and trying to bring technologies together. And then Rowan told this story about creating the ITC.
Right.
Like, why is it 30? Well, yesterday we learned. We learned why it was 30 because that's the number they agreed to around the table.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And think about that, like the formation, the sort of building the organization, and then the creation of the most fundamental policy upon which we all
The bedrock
of our industry. And it was all there on the stage yesterday.
What, from your perspective, listening to that discussion of the last 50 years, has been the biggest change?
Oh my goodness. Well, all those gentlemen looked a lot alike.
I'm so glad this is your answer.
One of the things that, and that's okay, right? They were reflective of their time.
Totally.
Fred talked about, SEIA giving the person of the year, but as an award that they did every year in the early SEIA years. And he was being kind. It was called the man of the year. It was right there in his notes. I could see it. And I'm also familiar, but he was trying to be a bit more inclusive in his language.
That's really amazing.
Isn't that?
Yeah. I love that you just shared that his notes said man of the year and he changed it in real time. That's beautiful.
It is really beautiful. So I would say that's one of the biggest changes is just the sort of shift from this group of academics and probably engineers who are very technically focused and very homogenous to a much broader sense of what the industry is, right? Bankers and engineers, but also environmentalists and attorneys and construction workers and electricians, right? And that the sort of complexity and the diversity of that workforce has also changed. But also, so that's one. And the other thing is, I was so struck when Scott Sklar said, we were selling a dream. We were selling a dream. It did not exist. You and I can walk into any politician's office and talk about the 263,000 Americans and the $60 billion. That's real, tangible. You can see it. Those guys were they had a vision and they executed against that vision, but it hadn't happened yet. And that's amazing.
I know that it's probably self-evident if you've ever seen Roan that he is in fact huge and tall, but it wasn't clear to me yesterday just who the giants were, whose shoulders we stood on.
Yeah, we did. And sort of giving them an opportunity to share that history.
It was beautiful.
It was really beautiful. I was honored to be a part of it.
So we're here in D.C. I'd be remiss to not talk a little bit about politics. We're in an election cycle.
Yes.
What's the ground game from here to November?
Oh my goodness. Well, sleep first. And then
catch up from this past week.
Catch up for the last week. During our board meeting, we had a number of conversations about different scenario planning, right? What happens if it is a clean sweep for Republicans? What happens if it's a clean sweep for Democrats? We didn't actually spend a lot of time on that one. But also sort of various permutations of the Senate, the House, the presidency. So I would say kind of on the preparation for all outcomes, we're doing a lot of work around what does it look like? How do we prepare? How do we have the policies ready, the conversations ready? And that is all happening. On the electoral side, right, we are doing so much work on telling our stories, just like we talked about, right? And so making sure that members of Congress know that factories are being built in their districts, that big projects have been built in their district, that taxes are being generated in their districts, and not just sort of sitting here in Washington and telling them that, but inviting them out to groundbreakings, having their staff come and do visits. It has become a bit of a nice problem to have that we have so many events happening in the field that we have to have a conversation about who's staffing them,
Yeah.
right? Like I physically can't go to every single one, which is a really lovely, lovely problem to have.
It is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Before you came to the industry, I was part of the generation that saw our manufacturing leave, right? I remember ordering product from the last batch of Sharp panels that were made. I remember the same with Evergreen. And I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see this industry in what was sort of the beginning of Solar 2.0. And it's really encouraging. I got to say, I was a naysayer when everyone was like, "Oh yeah, we're going to have it in domestic marketing," and I was like, "Heck no, we're not." I never believed it, but you guys have been such champions.
Yeah. I mean, I feel in some ways we followed the lead of our forefathers, right?
Yeah.
Like we sold a bit of a dream,
Yes.
right? Like we had
It's
a
so true.
vision that we could do this.
Yeah.
And we have been advocating for it.
Yeah.
To the skepticism of many people. And it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening.
I think that one of the things that the industry didn't want to acknowledge, frankly, is that it wasn't really a Democratic push, right? Like this happened in the Trump administration. And, famously, he was like, "We're bringing them back home," right? And I think the rest of the industry was kind of like, "Nah, we can't get on board with that," because that's his idea, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out it's actually really healthy for the industry.
It's really good. Well, I think a couple of things, I mean, you know this, but so we started thinking about manufacturing. We created a manufacturing division and had our first manufacturing summit in 2019. So it was pre-President Trump. But you are absolutely right that between sort of the imposition of tariffs and COVID, right, when all the supply chains kind of got really disrupted, I think we all looked with a different lens, right? There is a ton of value and security and risk mitigation to have not only a diversified supply chain, but one that is much closer to home. And there's certainly political benefit to that, but there's real business benefit to that. And that I think changed a lot of folks' perspective around kind of the viability of a domestic manufacturing base here.
Are you concerned at all with the alternative, with a red sweep, so to say?
I am concerned every time there's an election.
Yeah, fair.
Because this uncertainty in anything is not a friend to business. And so we can certainly all agree that there's uncertainty around November. I'm always anxious around sort of ensuring that whoever is in power, right? And any White House is literally right there.
Yeah.
The Hill is right there. That they understand kind of all of the benefits that we bring to the table. That's my job, is to make sure that happens. But also that, we at SEIA believe in a diversified energy portfolio, right? Our goal is 30% by 2030, right? Maybe 45% by 2035, 2040. That's still 55 to 70% other technologies.
Correct.
And I think that's where a lot of the divisive politics happens, is that folks assume perhaps that we think we should be 100% of everything.
Take everything now.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's, I don't think, realistic from a technical perspective, nor is it, I wouldn't put all of my retirement savings in one fund, right? And so I don't know why a country would put all of their energy in one technology. Yeah. So that is, I have to say, when especially when talking to Republicans, that is a point that I share, and because almost no one tells me they're anti-solar, right? Very few people, and especially to me, right? They're not going to say that. But sometimes they'll say, well, I really do believe in all of the above. Solar is an important part of that all of the above strategy.
Yeah.
And here are the ways in which we can work together to make that so.
I think it's such a testament to the dream that Scott Sklar and Fred Morris and so many others helped to bolster, that politicians are basically asking, right? Can't it be all of the above? Whereas we heard stories over the last few days, politicians were very clearly saying, this doesn't have a chance, just so you know. I thought that was such a fun story.
Yeah. It's really cute that you're asking, but never going to happen.
Exactly. Just thought you should know.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think that's part of what was so magical about last night at the gala, is that we were in an incredibly beautiful space, the National Portrait Gallery. People dressed up,
It was so
right?
good.
People looked beautiful and exquisite.
Yep.
We had members of the administration, members of Congress in attendance. We were actually, we talk a lot about being the big kids at the table. Like last night, we were a mature, professional, like very sophisticated industry.
You could see it from the
You could
congressman,
see
from
it.
the congresspersons in attendance.
Oh my goodness, yes.
You could tell they were like, wow.
Yeah.
They showed up.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the last 50 years, but the best is yet to come. Give me a sense of the next 50 years in terms of not just the work that SEIA has to do, but as an industry, what are we looking forward to over the next 50 years?
Yeah. Such a fun thing to think about. And I asked, that was the last question, as you know, that I asked Fred and Scott and Roan yesterday, when we gather again for our 100th anniversary, what will the state of the solar industry be? And I think I could totally concur with their answers. The ubiquitousness, I think that's a word, of solar. Ubiquity. Oh, I like that better. The ubiquity of solar. So not just in terms of panels on every roof, but the materials we use, right, for paint and for roads and for building materials. And, I don't know how that's going to happen because I'm a lawyer and not a technologist, but I believe that it will happen. I know a lot of research is being done now, right? So I think that's one thing. I think that kind of the changing of the regulatory model so that there is a lot more acceptance of distributed generation and sort of virtual power plants and kind of all of the different ways that technology is moving and policy has to catch up. One of the folks, I think it was Scalar yesterday, said, we're a solutions business, right? Our technology is solar and storage, but what we're really trying to do is solve individuals, companies, utilities challenges, right? How do they have a reliable, affordable, resilient, sustainable energy source? And we can solve that, right? And so I think that our businesses will continue to evolve their thinking in kind of being solution providers. And then lastly, it would be remiss if I didn't talk about the workforce, right? Like, I don't know, have you spent a lot of time in Houston?
I have, I think honestly, the last time I was in Houston was with you.
Oh yeah. So in my last job, I spent a ton of time in Houston. And you know this probably intuitively, in Houston, everyone either knows someone or is someone who is in the energy industry and particularly the oil and gas industry, right? And I think that ubiquity will, not just with regard to the technology, but with regard to the workforce, right?
Yeah.
Like folks will be like, oh yeah, my sister-in-law, my neighbor, myself work in this, if not solar, the renewable energy industry.
Yeah.
And I think that has power in and of itself.
Yeah. What I hear you saying that I really align with is that in 50 years, as ubiquitous as the word energy in Houston is for referencing what we now consider to be traditional energy technology, fossil fuels by and large, in 50 years, when someone says, I'm in the energy industry, they hopefully won't have to question, are they talking about renewables or fossil? Right. They will likely be talking about renewables.
Right.
And someone may have to clarify, like, actually, I'm in, the 5% that still extract dinosaur bones and burn them to power a small portion of our economy.
Right.
Yeah.
Think about that.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating, right?
And also, what's really fascinating, and we talk about this a lot on the show, is how Houston has embraced it. Houston has said unequivocally, we will not be left behind.
We will not be left behind.
And I think they're looking at like Pittsburgh and other places going, nope,
right?
Not on my watch. We are not letting the energy industry leave Houston.
Absolutely. And so there are certain parts of my career I can look back on and say, that's when I knew this thing was real, and obviously I spent time in the offshore wind industry. And when the oil and gas majors from Europe came to the United States and started investing in offshore wind here, that's when I knew it was real, right? Because companies like that don't put big capital into projects that they don't believe in. And so similarly, when Houston says, we're not going to be left behind, we've caught their attention.
Well, a lot of the work that you do is around policy, and lawmakers are a big part of the work that SEIA is engaged in. when we look forward, there are longstanding challenges to the infrastructure that we have to build. Secretary Granholm talks about it all the time. How can industry and policymakers work together to address these longstanding challenges?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question because, as we think about the systems we have today, they're just not built. I'm not telling anyone anything they don't know. They're not built for the energy system that we are creating and that we're operating on. And so I think one is just acknowledging it, right? And I think Secretary Granholm does a really good job of doing that. I think two is being open to the idea that we can't just do more of the same, right? We can't just shove more projects to the interconnection. We can't just build more transition as our only solution. Clearly, building transition is part of the solution, but so is distributed generation, right? And so are other technologies and sort of distributing literally sort of energy resources all over the grid. Like all of those are solutions. But I think sort of your question is, how does industry and policymakers work together? I think it honestly is providing solutions to policymakers, right? I got lobbied a lot when I was in government, and the most effective lobbying was when someone brought me a solution instead of bringing me a problem. So going to a lawmaker or policymaker and saying, "Hey, we don't have enough transmission,"
don't complain.
It's not super helpful, right? I would not consider that effective advocacy. That is effective whining. But saying, "Hey, we have identified a challenge, and here is a suite of solutions, some of which need legislation, some of which need regulation, some of which need funding, and I'm going to help you have this winning story." That I think we can always be better at, right? And being really cognizant of what the realities of the energy markets are, and kind of how I have many beliefs. One of them is that people and companies act in their best economic interests, right? They make decisions. And so if we are not incenting companies to change their interconnection queues or build more transition or be open to competitive sort of procurement on their transmission lines, nothing's really going to change. So I think as an industry, we really need to be open to looking at the financial model, right? Because we have 100, 200, 8 million years. People act in their best economic interest.
That ultimately is why solar wins.
Yes, 100%.
It is the cheapest. It will be free.
Yeah.
I think the coolest thing I've learned in the last 20 years of being in this industry is that the biggest game changer about this industry is that if you look at kind of how Texas is working now, this industry disrupts itself over and over and over again. The entire duck curve model is arbitrage. Well, it turns out when everyone builds infrastructure against the arbitrage disappears, and now you got to find additional ways to service. Right. Like now, what do you do with all this power?
Right.
We got to put it to good use.
Yeah.
But like the oil and gas industry didn't have that they couldn't move fast enough to disrupt themselves. But we disrupt ourselves every 5 years. It's insane.
Well, I think, you speak to your solar warriors, right? And I think the most effective solar warriors are those that can anticipate and adapt quickly, right? Like that. And so when I say SEIA has an entrepreneurial spirit, and I came to this industry because I saw the entrepreneurial spirit, it's that ability to pivot and pivot and pivot, right? And I know that's one of the things I love about it here.
Collaboration, innovation are often cited as crucial for progress of any industry. I think that SEIA is in a unique place where you see how the industry is evolving, that sort of amoeba. Are there any particular areas of partnership that you believe are essential and even innovative that will help to drive the change we want to see in this industry?
I don't know if I've ever said this out loud before, but when I got this job in the beginning of 2017, I don't remember which board member I was talking to, but he said to me, you really got this job because you play well with others. Like me personally.
Oh, wow.
And it cracked me up. I was like, this is like a nursery school, report card. Plays well with others. But I brought that, I own it. And I've sort of brought that philosophy to the work that we do. And we at SEIA and we as an industry have a number of collaborations with other groups and other technologies and other advocacy organizations. And so I would say kind of cross technology is one area where it's really important to work together, right? Because as we talked earlier, we're not going to be the 100% of the energy mix, nor should we. It's not a mix really. So, having close collaboration with hydro, with storage, with wind, with land-based and offshore, right, with energy efficiency, kind of understanding as we saw the solution, right, the solution set that we're offering to the nation, and making sure we're coordinated across technologies. That's a simple, in my opinion, a simple one. But we also have opportunity to collaborate across party lines, right? It is sometimes people ask me what's really my goal, and one of my many really goals is that solar and renewables will not ever be thought of as a partisan issue ever again, right? Imagine a world in which, and so we're making good progress on that, right? There are a number of organizations here in Washington and across the country that identify 100% as conservative Republican organizations that are very committed to climate and to climate change and to renewable energy. And so we partner closely with them, like the Conservative Climate Caucus in the on the Hill, in the Congress. The chairwoman of that was at our gala last night and spoke. There were folks from American Conservation Council, ACC, not the sports league, who are actually focused particularly on students and very young professionals. They were at our gala last night. We're partnering with them for events in Milwaukee at the RNC. CRES, I get all the acronyms mixed up, but the Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Heather Reams and I are close friends, right? I spoke at her conference. She came to our strategy summit. She went to the Wizards fever game with me last Friday night. So building those relationships in conservative circles has been really impactful, and I think gives us credibility that we are not coming to say only us, but we're coming to say we want to be part of this solution. And if you think about kind of collaboration across different folks that bring in different perspectives. So we were one of the first, if not the first, supporters of BOSS, Black-owned solar services. That has been an incredibly meaningful partnership to me personally, but to our organization. Their entire board was invited, and many of them attended our gala last night, which was really cool. They were at our strategy summit. And so I think, and RISE, the Women in Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy, their CEO was at my table last night, right? And so always looking for partners, but being really clear about what we're trying to accomplish. We have lots of partnerships with unions as we think about prevailing wage and we think about apprenticeships. We have lots of partnerships with non-union apprenticeship programs. And so I think my working theory is that you look for places where you have commonality, common interests, and it doesn't have to be 100% crossover, right? It's like, where is that intersecting areas where we can join voices and work towards that vision? And it's okay if we don't agree on everything. It's really okay.
Abby, if you could leave every person that you meet with one thing, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. If I could leave every person I met with one thing, it would really be to just be their most authentic self. Maybe that means that they devote their career to renewable energy. Maybe that means that they are true to how they identify, who they love, what they believe, who they want to be, whatever it means to them. I've had the privilege in the last year and a half or so of really being open and authentic. And I get a lot of really shitty feedback about it. I don't talk about that very often. But much more importantly, I got a lot of really positive feedback. And I'm okay with it. Like, I want to be around people that are authentic and changing the world. So that's what I would say for every single person.
For what it's worth, I think that, and I've said this in private and public circles, I think that leaders who want to see what it looks like to be authentic and lead from the front, especially on social media, should be emulating what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. as we wrap, and not that in any way I feel your job is done in any time soon. I think that you, like Roan and Scott, will be a decade plus in this role. I think you'll do a tremendous job. But I'd love to hear, sort of as a time capsule for the future, as the CEO, as the sitting CEO, what would your advice be to the person that you will eventually hand the baton to?
That's a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before, Nico. I love it. Well, first I would say I am handing you the most wonderful team on the planet, right? Committed, brilliant professionals. And so take very good care of them, right? Very good care. I really believe in servant leadership. Like, this is not about you. Your job is to take the hits, protect your team, and bring in the money, right?
Yes.
Like, that's your job.
That's so well said.
So I would absolutely say that, and I would say just keep dreaming big. You know, I have never done anything in this role that someone said, don't, you're not allowed. You can't do that, right? People will follow a leader, turns out. And so dream big, you know, communicate why you're doing it, and then go do it. Go do it.
Be the storyteller.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for the wonderful storytelling you're helping the industry create.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for doing it as well. Such a pleasure. You're one of the highlights of my journey here in the solar industry.
Thank you. That really means a lot to me.
Yeah, that's
We're
true.
co-creating.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're co-creating with you as well. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, let the world know that we're changing things, and SEIA is a core part of it. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Hope that you will be back again next week. Thank you so much to those who help sponsor so that all you have to pay is attention. They take care of all the rest of the bills so we can travel to places like DC, meet with people like Abby, and help you along your career, build your company, and make meaning in the world. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.